Hi, let's talk about exterior lighting. So first of all, we have this photograph and we can clearly see that we have two different types of lights. The first one being the sunlight and the second one is actually our ambient light. In some cases, we will have a very bright sun, which creates lots of contrast as the shadows that we can see at the right side. If we go back to this photo, we can clearly see that the sun with the ambient light are basically working together and there's not really a hierarchy between these two. Now let's go to another one. This is another type of lighting that we will have in our photographs. And you can also try to find something similar to this, which is a very nice type of reference that you can have. Obviously, having a night scene helps us a lot to create this type of contrast between warm and cold colors. Now our next one is totally ambient light, and we can actually see a little bit of a sun ray at the back, but in here our ambient light is actually the predominant one. Alright, so in this example we really don't have any sunlight, just ambient light. So this type of light actually makes our scene very clean. And again, for our last reference, we have this type of light in which the predominant light, again, it's the ambient light. Okay, so let's make a recap. First of all, we have this type of lighting in which the sun is so strong that it creates some contrast between the shadows and the actual sunlight. And this next one, none of the lights are actually being predominant. The ambient light and the sunlight are almost at the same level of intensity. In here, it's obvious what's going on. The night scene helps us to create a very interesting contrast between warm and cold colors. We can also see the very interesting shadows that are being created because of the interior light here in the ground. Over here we have the ambient light, and in here we can see a type of light that leaves us with this very clean scene. Okay, so now let's go to 3ds Max and learn how to create all of these types of lighting. Okay, so first of all, let's start off with the ambient light. So for this, I'm going to go to the material editor and I'm going to create a new tab called Sky. I'm going to bring in the Corona Sky. And the Corona Sky is actually the best one to use to create this type of ambient light. In this case, we're not going to be using an HDRI because the aim of this lecture is to learn how to create all of these lightings that we just saw. Now let's go to the render setup and to scene, and down here on single map, I'm just going to replace my existing Corona Sky with this one to take it all from scratch. So let's plug it in here. Okay, now the intensity, we know that 1, it's way too high. So let's put in a 0.1. Okay, now one thing that we should keep in mind before moving on is that even though we're using an ambient light, there's always going to be a light source from one side coming into the scene. So for this, I'm going to go back to my references. And now let's check this out. Now there's obviously a light coming in from the back of our camera, which is striking directly to this facade. So let's take this image for instance. Even though our ambient light is actually being the predominant here, on the left side, we can appreciate that a light coming in from the right side is striking, creating some soft shadows on our left side. So this happens every time we're using ambient light. So if we go back to this one, there's a light coming from the back of the camera that is striking directly to the front facade. This is why we can see this type of shadows just underneath the beams of our roof. So we cannot just use our Corona Sky. We need to create artificial lights to make the scene a little bit better. Okay, now that we know that, let's go back to 3ds Max and start our interactive rendering. As you notice, we've changed the context from being a very cold winter scene to this more green looking visual. I think we need a little bit more of intensity from our Corona Sky, so let's go ahead and put in a 0.3 here. But I think this is too much. Let's go for 0.2. Okay, this is looking better, but now we don't have any light source that's predominant here in our scene. And that is something that is always present on our reference photographs. So to create an artificial light, we're going to be using a rectangle light from the Corona options. So let's go into a more comfortable viewport to create this. I'm going to go to the Creation tab, and here on Lights, I'm going to go into Corona and Corona Light. Make sure down here that the shape is not the sphere, but actually a rectangle. Okay, so if I just press and hold my Control key, I'll be able to create a uniform sized rectangle light. And now by using my gizmo, I'm just going to rotate it like so and put it somewhere over here. So I want this light to be actually hitting my front facade. And this is actually too big, so let's go into its parameters and reduce the width and the height. Okay, now let's move it a little bit closer there. And now let's go back to our scene and start the interactive. Alright, so you can see that our light has actually added a lot more detail. However, we can see it reflected on our windows. And we can actually avoid this by going into the visibility properties, and we will just disable the visible in reflections and visible in refractions. Now let's go back and start that interactive render again. Alright, so this way we can get rid of that reflection, but also we've lost some detail of the reflection on our structure here. So the way to go around that is actually to let this happen on the reflections and locate this rectangle light in a different area. So let's just enable that. I'm going to move our rectangle light a little bit to the back. Let's start the interactive render once again. Alright, so we still have a little bit of issue there, but no worries. I'm going to go ahead and select my region just to cover my windows there. And maybe I can bring this down so that it don't appear here on my reflections. And I will also rotate it so that the light is not actually pointing downwards but upwards. I'm going to go to my view and then local to get my gizmo placed locally on my object here and move it like so. I can also increase the intensity of this light by just a little bit more. 70 probably will do the trick. Alright, so you can see that this is looking very nice. So we've covered this first type of lighting. We've used a corona sky mixed with a rectangle light. As easy as that. Okay, so for our second type of light, we're going to be creating a sun. So let's go back to our references. We're going to go for this type of light in which the sun has a high intensity value so that it starts to create this type of shadows. Okay, so now we can just turn this one off, and just in case I'm going to right click it, go into the object properties, and in here we have the rendering control options. I really don't want to delete it, I just want to hide it. But the best way to go around that is by deactivating the renderable option and then hitting OK. Obviously, you can also just right click it and hide selection. But for now, let's just leave it as it is so that we can have it there. Back to our creation panel, let's go into the Corona tab and Corona Sun. So I'm going to create a sun like this, as if we had it in the afternoon. Now let's go into its parameters, and we're going to be reducing the intensity to around 0.5. Now we might need to place some other assets in the left side so that it can cast some shadows on our ground. But let's start interactive render to see how this looks. Let's go to the render setup, our scene, and start interactive. Alright, it's looking pretty nice just as it is, but in our tone mapping, we might have to go a little bit further up in our highlight compression. Let's go ahead and try a 5. Alright, so we might actually need to create those extra assets at the left side, so I'm going to leave it at 3.5 and stop the rendering. To make this a little bit more natural, we need to create some kind of vegetation to go with this. So let's go into the creation tab. Now let's go into our standard primitives and let's change this to chaos. Let's just create a chaos scatter and bring in a couple of trees. Doesn't matter which type of trees they are, we're only going to be using them to cast some shadows. So we can just use the Cosmos browser for this. Let's go into vegetation, or directly here on the left side to trees, and let's find something that will go well with our scene. This Persian ironwood will do just fine. Okay, now once downloaded, we can just export it. And I'm going to create a rectangle for this, just to place them here. But first of all, let's just move it out. Let's go into our splines and then select the rectangle. I'm going to be placing them in here. Doesn't really matter where, because again, we're only going to be using them as shadows. Let's select the chaos scatter, go into the modifiers and select the distribute on target objects. So let's hit that add icon and I'm going to select this spline. Deselect this. Now let's select our tree like so, and obviously that's way too many trees. So here in the surface scattering, we're going to be reducing the 1000 value to, let's say, 50. That's a bit too much still. We can go to 25. Now this is a bit too high, so I'm going to reduce the height. Let's just rotate this so that it matches our angle. Okay, so we actually need to set this on our interactive rendering. So let's just start it. Alright, so as you can see, this is a little bit too high. So let's just keep it running and let's go back and bring them down. Okay, so there we go. Now the sun intensity, it's a bit too high still. So let's go into it and we can reduce it to just 0.4. Okay, we can actually just leave it at 0.5 just to match this scene with our reference. And maybe we could just add a little bit more contrast. So let's go to a 4 value. Our highlight, we can move it to 4. And LUT will help on this one. I'm actually using the ground control grunge. Alright, so if we double check our scene, we can see that the sun is actually a little bit more yellowish. So you can see that the light from the sun or the whole scene is a little bit more green, a bit more yellowish. So we have to change that on ours. On our white balance, let's just leave it as default as 6500. Let's reduce the simple exposure to around 1. And we can actually increase the green magenta tint to 0.05 will do. Alright, so I think we've done a pretty good job with this type of scene. You can keep on playing with the tone mapping configurations and also with the sunlight. So actually, if we change the realistic to a direct input, and let's see if we could change this direct input color to a more yellowish one and hit OK, we can actually start seeing some difference there. Okay, so let's go back, and this is actually a little bit too much of it. So let's reduce its value. Okay, maybe a little bit darker there. A little bit more of a green tone we can go for without losing our yellowish tones so that we still keep it on the realistic side. Okay, so that's how you change the color of the sun. However, for this case, we're going to be using the realistic mode. Okay, so another thing that we can do is just to elevate our sun to make it stronger. So if we just drag our sun upwards, we will make that sunlight way stronger. So in this case, we're going to be having to reduce its intensity by just a little bit. 0.35 will do. And obviously we will have to elevate our trees too. So let's bring it all the way up here. Okay, so we actually need to place this properly. And let's drag it all the way back here. All right, so this will do. Now let's go back to our sun. And remember that we can increase the size to make our shadows a bit softer, but I think they're doing really good right now. Let's actually bring the exposure a little bit up, 1.15. And our white balance, we can actually increase it a little bit more to bring those warm colors in. Let's try 8000. And there we go. Now I think we can do a better job with the sky, but now that's up to you to select your preferred sky and place it over here in our render setup. So let's just go there to our scene, and down here we would just place the background to the direct visibility override instead of our refractions override that we've been using. Alright, so now for our last type of lighting, it's the night scene with our interior light creating some contrast. So for this, I'm obviously going to turn off my sun. So let's just turn it off from here. And then inside our corona sky, we will be needing this to be at a very low value. Let's try 0.01. And now let's select the interior lights. So we can just select the lights by going up here to the top left side and replace the all selection with the lights selection. So because these are instants, I'm only going to be selecting one of them. So you can see that I have some lights up here on my ceiling. And if we go back to our reference, you'll notice that this light, it's actually a very warm light. So let's keep that in mind when playing with the parameters from this. Now I'm going to go to Kelvin temperature instead of the direct input, and I'm going to be placing around 3400 to make this type of light, which is a very warm one. Alright, so let's start the interactive render. Okay, so I need both the interior and the Corona sky lights to be way more intense, to have higher values. So I'm going to change the intensity to 100 here, and actually the lights from the other block are not instanced. So I'm going to place the same parameters, 3400 and 100 here. And I'm going to increase the height of this lights to 10. Okay, that's looking a bit better. And let's check out the last block over here. We don't have any lights going on because they're actually down here. So I'm going to grab them and copy them as an instance. And let's just place them inside this space. These lights are obviously going to be having the same parameters, 3400 and an intensity of 100. We don't have these instanced, so let's delete it. I'm going to copy this one as an instance. There we go. Okay, so now let's go back to our Corona sky and give this an extra value of 0.05. That's way too much. 0.2, we're getting there. We can probably try 0.015. Okay, now we can start playing a bit more with our intensity. So let's go back to the main block and I'm going to go for 150. Alright, so we can also place an overall interior light so that we bring in some more lighting into our interiors. So let's reduce the intensity from this one to 50 because we're going to be placing this rectangle light. Let's go into the creation tab, lightings and Corona light. I'm going to go to the top view and make sure that you have the shape as rectangle. So let's place a rectangle light, which will basically cover our whole slab. Now make sure that the light is actually going upwards and not downwards, as you can see. So I'm going to go and select my angle snaps and rotate it to 180 degrees. And I'm going to also copy this as an instance on my other spaces. Let's go ahead and place this here at the top too. And let's drag it so that we can cover this side as well. Now let's go back and see what we have. Okay, so this is actually way too much. Let's just select one of them because they're instanced. Let's go into its parameters and make sure that the intensity of them are all the way down to 10. Still too much. Let's go for a 5. We can actually reduce the width of these rectangles. Let's say to 500. Okay, getting better. And we can also control the height of them. So let's leave it at 500 by 500. So I need some warmer colors here. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce this to 2500. Alright, so we're beginning to have something here. In the simple exposure, it's a bit too dark, so I'm going to go all the way to 1.5 here. And instead of having this rectangle downwards on our slab, we can place it so that it's actually vertical. Depending on the type of scene that you're going for, this is going to vary. So the point here is for you to learn how you can create this type of lighting. Let's go ahead and start the interactive render again. Okay, so this is actually looking better on this block here. So let's rotate all of them. Let's go for this one. Make sure that you have your snaps on to make this way quicker. We can leave this one on the slab because it's not actually that noticeable. And let's just check this one more time. Alright everyone, so this is it for this lecture. We've learned how to create the different types of lighting that we're going to be seeing on the exterior scenes. Now each one of them is going to vary depending on your reference image. So keep that in mind, and if you stumble somewhere, make sure to contact us. Thanks as always, bye for now.